What a dark day for the San Francisco Giants, because this isn't just a baseball story. This is a business of baseball story. You know, baseball is baseball. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes it rains, and that's the way it goes. The phrases incompetent, unwilling to spend, egg on their face really weren't phrases you could use to describe the San Francisco Giants until about 24 hours, 48 hours ago, when the big fish that they landed was so thrown back that the next fishing boat to pick them up was the New York Mets, and everything you thought about Landon the Great White just went completely away. As Giants fans were waking up to check their Twitter timelines, they couldn't believe it. Tom Verducci, one of the best scribes baseball has inside of Sports Illustrated, documented what he knew in terms of how this fell apart, how the deal with Carlos Correa disintegrated, and it's very good to have him here on with Damon and Ratto on 95.7 The Game. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom. How are you?
I am well. Thanks for having me, guys.
So, you know, every time probably someone brings you on to talk about a baseball player, they ask you, can you compare him to someone? Can you give me a comp for who you think he might be one day? Tom, can you give me a comp for anything business-wise that you think relates to what the San Francisco Giants have gone through with Carlos Correa?
No, there's nothing on this scale. I mean, listen, I remember back in the day, Aaron Seeley thought he had a job with the Orioles, and they flunked him on the physical. He went to Seattle, pitched for a while. The Mets did it with the draft pick from Vanderbilt, Kumar Rocker. Beat Torrealba. I mean, nothing as earth-shaking as this. I mean, you're talking about a deal over $300 million, one of the premier shortstops in the game. So, no, I don't even know if it's happened in other sports, guys, but nothing on this level in baseball that has ever happened.
Based on all the information that you provided and that other people have provided, this all seems to go back to the owner of the Giants, Charlie Johnson. Is there anything that suggests that it could be any other explanation than him just pulling out at the last minute?
I agree. I mean, these decisions are made at the ownership level. I mean, listen, the medical people can look at it and say, you know, we have some concerns here. This guy did break his fibula, had some ligament damage 8 years ago. Maybe there's something we saw in the physicals and the medicals that say, you know, there's probably an issue coming up down the road at some point. You know, every doctor, I think, is going to look at it a little bit differently. It's not an SAT test where there's just one answer. But the fact is, the doctor is not making the decision to get out of the deal. I mean, it's up to the owner to say, you know what, I trust your opinion. I'm going with you that we can't possibly get into this length. Or you say, okay, you've established what the risk is. I'm aware of that. I know that this guy's played 8 full seasons in the big leagues without that injury ever coming back and being an issue. And we're going ahead with it. So, yeah, I would not put this on the doctors. If that's what you're asking. I mean, this has to be an ownership decision.
Tom, well, I just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that the doctors are culpable in any way. I'm wondering if there's anybody culpable other than Charlie Johnson himself. I guess I'm asking
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, no, I wouldn't think so. Again, it's too big of a decision. I mean, again, is he going to take input from Farhan, anybody else in the front office, call around to, I don't know, other people in baseball who may have been in something like this position? Possibly, but I can't believe this is deferred to, even someone as high up as Farhan. I think this has to be an ownership decision. I think it's that big.
Tom Verducci here on 95.7 The Game. So the Giants front office and their reputation today is what?
Well, listen, I think being charitable, you'd say they're being very careful. This is something that's understandable to people in baseball, that once medicals get reviewed, there's a reason why people reach agreement, and you always hear pending a physical. It's not a rubber stamp. Now, most of the times it is. It turns out, to be pro forma, but, you do have to go through these medicals, and especially at this length of contract. So the hesitation would be understandable just on face value. But I think the other element here, guys, is that Steve Cohen was waiting there. The baseball has never seen an owner with as much money as Steve Cohen has. And he's not just in the New York market. It's not just that he has a team that hasn't won the World Series since '86 and he grew up rooting for that team. This is a guy who spends millions, if not billions, on artwork, and he's got the millions, if not billions, to spend on his baseball team. And we've not seen that dynamic in Major League Baseball. You're talking about one sport where there are really no guardrails. It is the most open, free market of the four major sports. And it's being tested like never before because we've never seen an owner this rich before. And, oh, by the way, also motivated. So I don't know if the Giants thought about this. I guess they did when it sounded like they were unofficially hemming and hawing. Hey, we need more time, telling Scott Boras, we need to, our doctors and medical people need more time to look at this. We can't go ahead with the press conference. We're going to release you from our letter of agreement so you can talk to other teams. They must have known at that point he was gone, if only because, the Twins had offered a 10-year deal. But the fact is they had to know that Steve Cohen was out there. And, nothing says 2022/23 baseball like the fact that Scott Boras is calling up Steve Cohen, who's vacationing in Hawaii, eating dinner and drinking a martini, and says to him, do you have 3 olives for a third baseman? Now, $100 million now is 1 olive. So Steve Cohen on vacation drinking his martini basically says, yeah. And 4 hours later, Correa is a Met. It's unbelievable how quickly it all worked out against the Giants, but that's what happens when you have a suitor like Steve Cohen and the Mets sitting there.
Tom, you wrote that in agreeing to give the Giants more time for a medical review, Boras says he asked the Giants to decide around 1 or 1:30. And by 1 o'clock, the Giants informed Boras they were not prepared to execute the letter of agreement. Have you, in the past, talking about other marquee free agents that the Giants found themselves bridesmaids to be instead of actually wedding themselves to the free agents, has an issue of response, timing, a lack thereof ever come up in all of the conversations you've had about why the Giants have not been able to sign a marquee free agent position player since Barry Bonds himself?
Yeah, I haven't heard that. And it was interesting you mentioned the Bonds because that ownership group officially hadn't even taken over yet. They actually had a deal in place. I guess that would be the inverse of dragging your feet. They couldn't wait to get that done. But no, I have not heard that. In this day and age and the way negotiations are conducted now, a lot of these things are being done by Zoom. You don't have as much in-person meetings with clubs as you did pre-COVID, actually, and those practices are going forward. So things seem to be move along, I think, quicker when deals come together now than they used to. But specifically the Giants, no, I don't know that they have finished second on somebody because they just weren't quick enough on the draw.
As a practical matter, and this is not a hard data question, but sort of just an opinion, how much damage have they done to their future ability to shop in the free market based on the way they pulled out of this? Not the fact that they, didn't sign Correa, but the fact that they waited till the last minute and seemed to bungle the entire process. How much damage have they done down the road, and for how long?
I think the damage is minimal. I'll go back to the Orioles because it seemed like they always had a higher threshold on what concerned them in medicals than other organizations. And agents knew that. And you just sort of bake that into the calculus when you're talking to a team. That, hey, they're going to go tooth and nail over this. They're going to raise some issues because you guys know you can find an MRI on any pitcher who made 30 starts and probably find something in his arm or shoulder. So that's the only comment. And again, I don't think it would stop people, but you go in sort of wary of the history. I still think it comes down to the deals you offer players. It always comes down to the best deals and offering the most money. And I think the Giants are at a point right now where they have a hard time convincing players, and this goes back to Aaron Judge, that you're going to have a chance to win every year starting now. That's the biggest thing I hear from players. And sometimes it's eyewash because the deal just is so much money that they have to take it. But players do want an opportunity because most of them, when they get to that point, are in their 30s. They've already made enough money. You're not providing or establishing yourself in the big leagues at that point. So you're looking for a place to win. And right now, and especially without Correa, the Giants are not able to tell people we're going to win every year that you're assigned here as a San Francisco Giant. I think that's a bigger deal than what happened with the medicals.
So I want to be able to understand what you just said. Is you don't think there's any long-term damage in the way they pulled out? That in fact, they're simply going to have to be able to establish the thing that we just offered you, we intend to stand behind, even though we didn't do it for Correa.
Yes, I don't think there is long-term damage there. Now, listen, if something else comes out that, really harms the reputation even more, because don't forget, the Giants and Farhan specifically, they're limited. They can't really give you chapter and verse of what happened, what the doctors saw because of HIPAA laws, because just it's not the way teams operate in terms of releasing medical information about a player, especially one that's not quite theirs. So they can't really explain to all the Giants fans out there who are wondering what exactly happened. They can't really tell you. So you have to go by, in terms of the amount of narrative that's been established, the story from Scott Boras' side. It's just the way it is. I'm not saying it's fair, but unless something else comes out on the Giants side that they somehow were grossly negligent here about paying attention to details, or maybe on the timing of things, because it did seem to take a while to come up with a response to Scott Boras about the medicals. Barring that, I don't think there are long-term issues right now.
Tom Verducci, Sports Illustrated, where do you think they go from here? I mean, they're all of the fancy cars have already been sold at auction, so now you're, in the Ford Escort, sort of lesser than free agents. I mean, we were talking about, Michael Conforto, who's a Scott Boras agent. Like, good luck with that right now. Jurickson Profar, Adam Duvall, maybe Craig Kimbrell, take a flyer there. What do you think the Giants are doing today to improve their baseball team, since they just walked away from a studly shortstop?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I like their pitching. There's still Nathan Eovaldi out there, but I would agree with you. You look at, most of the top free agents are gone. They're off the board. Conforto is an interesting case. Yeah, he's a Boras client. I get it, but that was a serious shoulder surgery that he had. You're really going deep into the medical files with a guy like Conforto. We know it's an injury that prevented him from playing an entire season. So that wouldn't stop me, though, if I were the Giants. He's worth at least looking at, because they do need more bats. I'd be concerned, too, about their defense, guys. I mean, you guys saw it last year. It was a poor defensive team, and now you're talking about a game. And the Giants pitchers put the ball on the ground as much as anybody. You're talking about a game without shifts. And the Giants, for years, were really good about dialing up the accuracy and having people in the right place at the right time. You can't do that. Without the shifts and pitchers who put the ball on the ground, and as poorly as the defense was last year, I don't know where they go with that as well. So, listen, we know that the Padres are a really good team, but the whole National League, actually, if you look at the flow of talent this winter and what went into the American League, what went into the National League, I mean, there's no doubt the National League got the bulk of the talent on the free agent market, and the top of the division, the league is absolutely stacked. So it's a high bar for the Giants to get to. Now, in a short period of time, it worked against them that this was a very fast-moving free agent market. We typically have a lot of premier guys out there after the end of the year. It's not the case this year. So I don't know where they go, but whatever their option is, it's not good.
This is a more of a league owner's question. Given the kind of money that not just Steve Cohen, but John Middleton and Peter Seidler and some other guys threw around this winter, do you think there is any enthusiasm among the owners for trying to figure out a way to curtail either spending or lengths of deals? Because it seems like this was the market on steroids.
Yeah, I agree, Ray. I mean, the length really surprised me. The game had gotten away from that, but now I understand, obviously, a lot of this is essentially an accounting trick to amortize the cost over more years so that the average annual value against the luxury tax number isn't as high. I get that, but, there's bills to pay down the road. Even if you're trying to reduce that tax figure, you're still paying guys in their late 30s, $25 to $40 million. But to answer your question, I think the answer is not so much payroll or tax thresholds, because, that Steve Cohen threshold they talked about at 293, I mean, he just blew by it. I mean, that wasn't in the way at all. So to me, that's not the answer. You're probably looking at, probably within 5 years, certainly within 10, expansion to get to 32 teams and expanding the postseason field even more, because that becomes the governor against spending so much money that you can put together a $500 million team, and yet the postseason is still a crapshoot. I mean, look at the teams, the 6 teams that won the most games last year. 5 of them, I mean, one won the World Series, the Astros. They were terrific. But the other 5 went 6 and 16 in the postseason. The Mets went out. The Dodgers went out. All these teams are going out quickly with high payrolls, which shows you that, to me, the governor is on the field in short series in the postseason. Now, as a fan, you might not like having, well, now we have 12 in the playoffs and 14 teams in the playoffs out of a 32 team, or 16 teams in the playoffs out of 32, whatever the number is. That's sort of the backstop against putting together a super team. I mean, a team like the Marlins, how do they compete against the New York Mets? They really can't. So they have to get in the back door into a postseason. And I guess the encouraging part for those teams is last year we had an NLCS, which neither team had won 90 games, the Phillies and the Padres. That, to me, is probably the future of the sport, that more teams get in, and you take your chances in the postseason, but you can't compete against these behemoths over 162.
One last question for me, and it has nothing to do with any of this, but this story just broke a minute ago. An arbitrator has reduced Trevor Bauer's suspension and basically making him available for the 2023 season. What do the Dodgers do about that? Do they bring him back? Do they pay him off and release him? How do you think this plays out?
Well, first of all, it affects their bottom line, because I think their plan was to get under the first luxury tax threshold and reset their tax rate. As a third-time offender, they would be taxed at 50% above, rather than getting it back down to 20 for 2024 by getting under the first tax threshold, which I think is 233 this year. I don't know if it's possible now, because Bauer's number is close to 40, if not over 40. So you've got that to deal with. But I'd be surprised if the Dodgers welcome him back and he's got a Dodger uniform on again. I just think it's so difficult for them to put him back in the Dodgers uniform, tell their fan base, we know this guy was suspended for a year, and not that all is forgiven, but we want to move forward. It's hard to move forward with the amount of information that's come out from that case. So it's a difficult call to think whether he's going to be pitching for the Dodgers again, but I think odds are probably more that he will not than that he will.
Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Tom Verducci is Sports Illustrated here on 95.7 The Game.